All right, hello friends. Thank you for joining me again today. My name is Dan and I do artwork. This is Daily Art Adventure number 773. And I think this will be a short broadcast because I've decided to limit the subject quite drastically to cheating. You have to put that in quotation marks. Is it really cheating? Well, yeah, no, yeah, I don't want to, yeah. So I'm calling it cheating. Cheating with gouache. Do you like how I overpronounced that word for you? Cheating with gouache on a watercolor painting. And hello, Michael. Since our last broadcast, I have taken the liberty of doing some cross-hatching with this kind of pen, and actually did a little bit of redrawing on all the figures. If you look at them really closely now, you can see they're all kind of double outlined. That was a trick. I came back after a break and said, wait a minute, this guy's head's too small. Oh, I hate it when that happens. You know, when you discover a mistake late in the process. I just went ahead and enlarged his head, so he's got a double line, and he already had a double line around some of his, anyway, so I did it around all of them, so it looks like a technique that I do on purpose. How's that for a lousy excuse, huh? But that's not what I'm here to talk about on this broadcast. I hope somebody will watch this that will really benefit, but let me get you, first of all, to a better camera. Okay, so I'm going to blind you like a hood on a hunting falcon. There. And let you have a good view of what I'm doing now. All right, cheating with gouache. First of all, let me move you over here and let you see my gouache watercolor kit. So gouache is a water-based medium, and it never becomes stable, right? Never stabilizes. In other words, when it dries, like in all these wells around the outside, it's reactivated with water. So it's never in a stable state, right? And it's very opaque. It's a lot of fun to play with. And this is my typical gouache kit. I'll go ahead and add right now that when you're doing gouache, it's easy to get color, it's easy to get dark color, it's hard to get light color. So I keep several tubes, this one's almost gone, I keep several tubes of fresh, you know, pasty, liquid, wet, fresh gouache on hand. So like you can't see it now, but there's a big pile of it right there, because reactivating the white, you know, if there's a pile of white, or if one of these wells had white in it, you rub and scrub and scrub and scrub and scrub and scrub, and it just never quite gets to the whiteness or the opacity that it comes out of the tube. Does that make sense? So there's just a tip for you. If you're going to use gouache, you can put all your colors, let them dry, but always keep a couple extra tubes of white on hand, because in a practical sense, that's the only way you can get it light enough. All right, now let me show you a trick or two. And what made me decide to go to gouache was, in fact, the skin tones, which is sort of what I expected. The only skin tone on the whole painting that's adequate is this. There's the bride's arm, maybe this bridesmaid's arm. Everything else is too. Now the fronts of these men's heads is all in shade, so those are supposed to be dark. But these, all the flesh looking this way, is supposed to be light. All right. So, do I like to use gouache? Well, it's fun. No, would I rather do a watercolor without any opaque? Yes, yes, yes. Why? Because what I'm going to show you now is how to cheat, again, cheat in quotation marks, get the job done. But I would rather, I don't want it to look to the casual observer. Now, a professional or a watercolorist will recognize this, but I want to do a good enough job of disguising my use of gouache so that a a casual observer, an amateur observer won't notice. And there's a couple tricks. One is matching. I'll talk about that in a minute. Another is, and this can help you, if you put down a bit of opaque gouache on a watercolor painting, okay? I'm not talking about a gouache painting. That's something entirely different. This is, I want the whole thing to look like a watercolor and pen and ink illustration or painting. Got it? But if you put down gouache, it will have a slightly different look than everything else. But you can do one rub, one pass of watercolor on top of the gouache, and that will go a long way to disguising, can I say, the gouache-ness? That will go a long way to obscuring the fact that the artist used gouache. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate that and not just talk you to death. All right. Important tip number 1 was keep wet white with you. Important tip number 2, which I'll do later, you can do watercolor on top of the gouache, but basically only one pass until it dries. Because if you go twice, it'll completely reactivate the gouache and it won't work at all. Okay, tip number 3 is color matching. So this is important. I have here, I found it during the break. I have here a piece of this paper. Okay, this was a custom cut on my cutting board, a custom piece cut of watercolor, and this is a piece of scrap. So it's very important to keep these scraps because this paper is exactly the same as this paper. Okay, that's important. Then I took scissors and cut off a couple pieces, and I started brushing gouache on the corners and then drying it. I know you know what a hairdryer looks like, but I just want to make sure. So then I dried it, and that's enough of that, right? With a hairdryer, because gouache, listen to this, if you're not familiar with this, this will mess you up. Gouache dries, for an artist, much different than it looks when it's wet. It gets much darker as it dries. Okay, so it gets darker as it dries. So you can't match colors with a wet color. But you can see here what I'm doing. So I mixed. This is try number 1, try number 2, try number 3, and then for the shadow side of the faces, either one of these 2 colors will do. And again, I have those. Here's my sunshine flesh color, and these are my 2 shadow flesh colors. Okay, so and I know that they're going to be the right color because I've brushed them on here and then dried them to make sure. All right, so let's get to work here. I'm going to pick up and I'm going to do the sunshiny part first, and I'm going to pick up my reference is on this phone. There we go. So I'm going to look at my reference again, and I'm going to paint with my left hand. And yeah, I'm looking at the photograph again, pursuing a likeness, pursuing similitude, pursuing realism as I look at the photograph. How close are you guys? Is that right? Yeah, that's appropriate. That's good enough. So a while ago, in an earlier broadcast, I was lamenting the fact that I was going to need to use white on her teeth. Well, now that's kind of a moot point, isn't it? Because in fact, I'm doing gouache on pretty much her entire face. Okay, so do you see how opaque that is? It's nice, nice and opaque. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I switched to right hand after all, didn't I? And And shall I go ahead and, yeah, I think I need to go ahead and do white teeth right now. So here's my small collection of small brushes. And again, to get a true white, I really need to have a tube of it available. So I've just squeezed that out onto my gouache palette. All right, that looks better. There. Okay, now if I need to darken, which I do, if I need to darken anything on this face, on this flesh tone, I will do that, not with gouache, but with traditional watercolor. But again, if you do any watercolor across this gouache, you get one pass, you get one stroke, then you have to wait for it to dry. If you do two strokes, it'll just completely reactivate the gouache, and it will not look like watercolor at all. Now, I think I'm going to go ahead and do her arm. You know, once you start cheating, again, please understand, don't you? I'm sure you do, that, you know, all the real watercolorists, if there were a real watercolorist watching me today, they would be having a cow. And I'm being, I hope, partly facetious. I know what real watercolor, I was a watercolor major 100 years ago in college. And much of my illustration life was done in watercolor. So I know how to do it. I just don't want to. I did go back in my archives this morning before I did my first broadcast a couple hours ago. I went back and looked on my early daily art adventures, the very first ones. I started on Facebook almost 3 years ago, January 1st of 2017. I started on Facebook. And some of the earliest daily art adventures that I did were, in fact, sort of side-by-side comparisons on this very topic of traditional, that is legit, legal watercolor versus my watercolor sketch technique. And I may try to upload those again and rebroadcast them just for fun. I mentioned yesterday that one of the things I did, and I didn't find this side by side, but one of the things I did was I did two very similar paintings, watercolor paintings of impressive Victorian houses, and I asked on Facebook 3 years ago, and then I asked my viewers which one they liked better, the legitimate, what I'll call legit watercolor, or the my cheater watercolor sketch. And the response I got back from my viewers, and I got a good response, was almost exactly 50-50. In other words, just as many people liked my sketch as much as they liked my legal, official watercolor technique. And so that was good for me. I mean, good enough. I still will do some, I have done many over the years, many what I'm calling now legal watercolor paintings. But this technique that I'm doing here is roughly, I think, 3 times as fast as the legit you know, the real watercolor. And hey, if just as many people like it, they like it just as many people like it just as much, then I'd say, why waste all my time doing a laborious watercolor technique when I can do this? And so this has essentially become my signature watercolor style. As you can see, obviously, pen and ink included to varying degrees, sometimes more, sometimes less. And all those lines, all those pen and ink lines, of course, they are there primarily. Why? Just to look cool. That's all. They're not necessarily to make it look more realistic. They are simply abstract marks. All right, I like that quite a bit. And I like my bride quite a bit. Yahoo, things are looking up here. I was a little bit alarmed a little while ago when I looked at my painting with fresh eyes, went, ooh, no, it's not good enough. A minute ago, you saw me pick up an X-Acto knife, actually, and scratch off a little bit of this gouache, a trick that worked fairly well. So as I glance quickly at all the work that I've just done on all these figures, the gouacheness, the gouacheness of my gouache paint does not scream out to me as much as I thought it would. It's you know, I think only a fellow watercolorist would even notice that it's not all watercolor. Wait a minute, he cheated. He used some opaque stuff there. So I'm pretty happy with that, because of course I'm not painting for you guys. I'm not painting for my fellow painters. I'm painting for a client, and I don't think they will. First of all, they won't know, they won't notice, they won't object, they won't even notice. So that's fine. But I'm going to do, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do one more step to obscure the gouacheness. Evidently that's a word on this channel. I'm going to do one more step to obscure the gouache feeling. But I hope you can see how friendly this stuff is, other than the fact that it's never stable, right? Other than that, it's just completely intuitive. It's the way a third grader paints. And you put the color down and there it is. Of course, it darkens quite a bit, but I've already tested I've already taken care of color matching. I showed you that a minute ago. So let me sit back, so to speak. I didn't touch the preacher's face. He doesn't need it. Very good. Ooh, that's a relief. I feel good about that. Also, by the way, you probably noticed that a little while ago, after I was doing cross-hatching, I did a little bit of, what's his name? Stu, hang on, I'll tell you here in a second. Famous movie poster. I'm being kind of facetious when I say this, but, Drew, not Stu, Drew Struzan. Famous movie. I picked up this brush, put ink on it, and spattered it with a palette knife. So I have speckled it. Just for some reason, this illustration, this painting, just felt like it would benefit from a little bit more rough texture. Let me show you again my brushes, my brush kit. This is the bottom drawer of my large portable watercolor kit, and just a little. I like brushes, as you can tell, and you've got to have brushes in a variety. But I go ahead and put all the fine point brushes in this box separately, so I don't have to go searching around, you know, in the bottom for the small brushes. They're all right there, so that helps me quite a bit. Okay, and I guess I said that because I was going to pick up one of those, wasn't I? All right, let's do a little bit of the now the dark side of some of these figures. And right now I'm playing a little bit with the double outline I mentioned a little while ago. With the ink, I came around and did a slight, I don't know how to say it, a double edge on many of these figures. And I'm playing with that now by doing some of this gouache. All right, let me look at his face. And things are getting serious. Let's point it. So I don't like the double outline on him right here. So I'm going to go in here and actually paint between. Let me zoom in. Whoops, I was zoomed in. Sorry about that. So I'm painting in between the cross hatching. Does that make sense to you? Actually painting around the pen and ink marks. Yeah, I'll redraw that eye in a minute. Nope, that mark's unnecessary. So do you see how the opaque gouache is really very effectively obliterating or covering up my erroneous earlier drawing? Can you see that? Hardly anybody will be able to tell that's been tinkered with, so to speak. I'm going to do the same thing on this guy's face. We'll call him Groomsman A. If I get the chance here in a minute, I'm going to give you guys a little treat. My oldest daughter is downstairs practicing guitar and singing. And I'm going to open the door, turn off my music, and let some of you hear a little bit of my daughter singing. Proud Papa here talking. She is quite the singer. She's been singing publicly since she was 17 years old. She exploded. I never heard her mom and I never heard her sing a note until she was 16 years old. So she's practicing Christmas carols, playing guitar. I don't know if you can hear that or not. And she's just practicing, she's not performing. Which doesn't happen around here very often. She's got 4 kids. So nothing, we don't get a lot of concertizing. I'll be doing more ink over some of what I just did. But frankly, I'm quite happy with the bride, the groom, the preacher, both bridesmaids. I'm happy with all of them. Whew, that's a relief. Okay, now I'm going to assume that area up there is dry. So let me finish this quick little broadcast again where I'm demonstrating cheating with gouache. Okay, how to cheat. How to use gouache and not get caught, so to speak. Now I'm going to do, just to make sure I'm on the right path, make sure I'm not about to head into a disaster, put my wash away and back to watercolor. So that's over here. Give everything a general spritz. Okay, so before I launch into my painting, I'm going to use my color chip test, and I want to add some warmth orange to the bride. So this is the same paint that's on her face. So if I go like this, I can darken that slightly. Let me add a little bit of sienna. Okay. Whoops, too dark. Okay, caught it. There we go, that's a nice little bit of color. Now I'm getting into the color of her hair, which is fine. Now how about the back of her arm? Okay, so part of what I'm trying to model here is if you do a little bit of watercolor, traditional watercolor, on top of your cheater gouache, you can obscure even more, obscure the fact that you cheated. Is that making sense? You know, and that might be finished right there. That might be all it needs, you know. This is one of those cases, in fact, much of watercolor, the case is less is more in much of watercolor, right? By the way, I always, when I do watercolor, I always have paint in one hand and a tissue in the other, always. Like what I'm doing now is traditional Dan Nelson watercolor technique. There, that's nice, I think. I'm not sure how it's looking to you guys. Let me go back, let's go look at the bridesmaids now and see if yeah. Oh, definitely. So the fact that there's a watercolor edge on top of the gouache, again, just goes a long ways to obscuring the gouache-ness, as I'm evidently going to persist in calling it here today. There we go, lovely. Good, some of you are hearing my precious daughter. This is my daughter and her husband have been living with us for 2.5 years. Ooh, Uncle 60. How to sign an official watercolor painting. Do I use watercolor paint, a pen, or acrylic paint just for signing? I think, Horatio, I think I guess not everybody knows your real name, do they? Uncle 60. Pencil is really, if it's a legit, or what you're calling, rightly so, an official watercolor painting, then it has graphite in the underdrawing. And I think most of the time, graphite is perhaps the most traditional. Not a pen. You could certainly do watered down acrylic. Yes, you could. I mean, watered down so it looks just like, watercolor, of course. But then why bother? Just use straight up watercolor. Okay, I'm going back to gouache here for a minute. Let's finish up a little bit. All the flowers here, the bride, the bridesmaids, and in the little urns behind them all, they have a greenish white cast. I think they're, oh no, what's the name of the big snowball shaped flowers? All those, I was going to say hostas, and I thought, no. I'm not a botanist, so I don't work hard at all at remembering the names of flowers. If I were smarter, I would, but there you go. Just not that smart. Just don't care that much, evidently. My mother would be ashamed of me. So there's a layer of, by the way, I've been rinsing my brushes out, my gouache brushes, so to speak. I've been rinsing my gouache brushes out in these jugs of water. And that means, in my opinion, now they're all contaminated, so I'll need to go dump them out because I don't want to be rinsing my watercolor brushes in water that is befouled, that is has opaque gouache in it. So just for me, it might not really show up, but it makes me nervous that it might show up. So in other words, I've contaminated my rinsing water with this gouache stuff. It's very likely that I will do some pen and ink a little bit on top of these flowers in particular. That will actually help disguise again, the gouache-ness. I'm like a what? Once you start using gouache, it's like a drug. You just can't stop. It's like, oh no, it's so much fun. It's so easy. Everybody who's tried to do watercolor, anybody who does watercolor, knows how hard watercolor is, because you have to think ahead. Oh no, not think ahead. And with an opaque medium, you don't. You just keep layering, piling it up. So right now, I'm trying to mix up it doesn't have to be a perfect color. I'm trying to mix up a dull brown. Because I think my little rail. Oh, this is not the right brush though. I think my brown railing. I'm not going to paint the whole thing by any means. No, that would be too much. But just little bits of it here and there. I started to say, our daughter and her husband have been living with us for 2.5 years. They are looking very hard for a house. And their 4 grandchildren, ages now 3, 5, 7, and 9. And we are loving it. We'll be partly relieved when they move out, but more than relieved, we'll be sad. So there you go. We're having a great time being very involved grandparents. What my daughter is doing downstairs, by the way, is not simply practicing the song. She's actually arranging the chords and so on and so on and so forth. So it's not just practicing, she's composing, if you will. It's all part of the business. She leads worship at the church we all now go to. We go to it because they go to it. I've been grandfathered into a church. I followed my grandchildren to church. Anyway, that's what's going on down there. You probably can't hear it all right now. She's quiet. She's real quiet right now. let me pause here and look. Do I like this railing? Do I like what I'm doing? Yeah, I think so. And again, very likely I'll do a tiny bit of messing up of these marks with either pen and ink or more watercolor on top of it. Same principle applies, by the way, maybe not quite as urgently, but remember my old rant that anytime there's a highly repeated motif in your painting, this does not apply to you hyperrealists or photorealists or realists, but those of us who are doing what I arrogantly call real painting, abstract realism. Whenever you have a highly repeated motif, like this fence is, that's repeated, right? Then same in watercolor as in oil, you want to render that repetition in a variety of ways. In other words, you don't want to do it all the same way because that's boring. And one of the highest values in all painting, all art, painting and drawing, is variety, right? The essence of a good watercolor painting is interesting marks. Okay. You hear me say the essence of good painting is interesting marks. Of course that applies to watercolor. Of course, of course, of course. The essence of good drawing is making interesting marks. And the essence of interestingness is variety. So therefore, when you have some shape in your painting that is repeated like this many times, you want to come up with a variety of methods for rendering it, which would dictate then that what I'm doing right now should not be the last layer, because there's too much sameness in what I've just done. And that is correct. It's not the last layer. But some of the staves, pickets, if you will, I don't know what you call them when they're metal, some of the sticks are created by negative painting, and then some of them, as you can see, are being rendered now by positive painting of opaque brown on top. So anyway, this particular broadcast about cheating in gouache is nearly at an end. I'll take just a second. I have 3 different thicknesses. Let me see how this one feels. Ooh, not very good. The 0.23 does not work. Let's try. There we go. All right. So, just for instance, what kind of thing might I do, say, to these flowers? The answer is draw on top of the gouache. Same trick in the sense that I was doing earlier. Diminish the gouacheness of that. I mean, everybody knows gouache is opaque, and most people would think, well, you would do gouache last then. And indeed, you would, unless, of course, you're trying to intentionally obscure the fact that you used gouache at all. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'll do some shading in between the staves as well. So according to my reckoning, these pickets, if you will, in the fence have now been rendered. I think 6 different techniques have been applied to achieve this look. Pencil, pen, negative watercolor, positive gouache, and then pen ink. So 5 different tricks, if you will, have been, and I'm quite happy with that look right there. And again, the cross hatching, so to speak, scribble hatching is really what I call it. it might add to the realism a tiny bit, but as you know, if you follow me, that the primary purpose is not realism. The primary purpose is, as my grandchildren would say, Bigga. That's my name, Bigga. Bigga, why'd you do that? And my answer is because I thought it would look cool. And that's why artists do, or and to be a little more sophisticated, because I think it would make it a better painting. Because I thought it would make it a better painting. And that, of course, is the difference between a real artist and a quote-unquote, to use the term loosely, a modern artist. Because most, not all, but most modern artists, when asked the question, why did you make that mark? The answer would be something like, because I want everybody to know that I'm mad. I want to, and then whatever their message is, you know, because, etc. Anyway, so do you see the real fundamental? You can hardly get any more fundamental than that. Real artist, that's someone who deals with visualities, if you will. A modern artist is dealing primarily with principles, message, sermon, preaching, politics, philosophizing. He's trying to communicate a message to a modern artist. Oh, here we go. So to a modern artist, art is communication. It's a form of communication. I remember listening to an NPR. Oh boy, they love modern artists. They were interviewing or talking about some artists in Somalia. And they were saying, these artists deserve to have their message get out. What a boatload of crap. Oh my goodness, they've all drunk the Kool-Aid. The Somali artists who are preaching at us and the NPR junkies who are likewise preaching at us that we deserve to listen to the voice of the artists in Somalia. And I say, shit, never mind, I'm not going to say that. Hogwash. So that's, and again, almost all modern art is taken over by the concept of communication. Art is about communication. So that's what I'm railing against, if you will. Now, when you walk through a modern art museum, not everything fits into that description. So I'm not, by no means, not against all modern art. I'm just against the crap that is preaching at you. And I will stand by that statement. The preachy crap, that's what I'm against. All right, okay. And you thought it was, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, Dan's off again. I'm going to do just a little bit more. Whoops, I got off camera, didn't I? Sorry about that. Hydrangea, thank you. That's what that plan is. I'm going to do one last thing before we go, and that is I'm going to whack these men's collars, okay? Hydrangea, thank you. Who was it who said that? Michael. You see, I'm smudging the edge of the collar with my finger to fade it out. Again, sort of diminish the gouacheness of those strokes. Okay, I keep saying that's the last thing I'm going to do, and then I say, oh, wait, one more thing. I will certainly be doing some gouache on the bride's dress. But I think this broadcast has gone long enough. I've ranted. I got a good rant out on you. I feel better. It's been a good. Okay. I feel another one coming on. Okay, so some of you guys who have missed many, bless your hearts, you missed my earlier rants. So what's wrong with communication? Well, nothing. I'm in for communication. Look, I'm communicating right now and I'm talking to you guys. But what I do object to is people masquerading as visual artists. Now, I mean, you know, this is a losing battle. The 20th century is against me in this. Virtually every professor in every university in the Western world disagrees with me, but that doesn't bother me because I know in 100 years I'll be proved right. And yes, I am just that arrogant. I am indeed. I'm so convinced that you can fool some people sometimes, can't fool up all the time. And in, who knows, maybe less than 100 years, people will realize the distinction between visual art and communication. And again, what is wrong with communication? Well, nothing, except that when it comes to the modern art world, almost, not all, but almost all the communication is in one direction. And it's toward a naturalist, nihilist, Marxist, depressive worldview. And that's why when my compatriots, modern art partners, create art that is oppressively dark, and I'm talking even about purely non-objective art. You wonder, how could non-objective art be dark and oppressive? But indeed it can, and I would name names, but I'm not sure I want to do that. So, well, no, never mind. Anyway, and when they do that, they are lauded by their partners as being honest. What does that mean? What the laudators, those who are applauding, what they really mean is we're all screwed. I'm going to use a theological term. We're all screwed to hell. We're all damned. It's a very depressing worldview, and there's only some artists out there that have the courage to tell the truth. You see, so it's all that whole world, almost the whole world, is predicated upon a very dark, disturbing, and gloomy worldview, and the purveyors of dark, gloomy art are lauded by their fans as being honest, where people like me who are creating beauty are scorned because they think we're lying. Bring it on, I say. Bring it on. Bring me your worldview. Chances are you don't even know you have a worldview. Never mind. I'm pulling the arrogance of a philosopher card on you right now. Most people don't even know what a worldview is. Not you guys, because you're smart. Watching me. Smart people watch me. Oh boy. That's getting a little, all right. Rant over. But in the meantime, I've done a bang-up job on this here bridal gown, haven't I? Again, I'll come back with a little bit of pen and ink and maybe probably some watercolor on top of this gouache. Again, to diminish the gouacheness. There you go. So that's the theme of this broadcast: using gouache and learning how to diminish the gouacheness of it. Yes, sir, folks. A term coined here, I'm sure, and nowhere else. But I must say that I will say I'm liking it. I will do a little bit of the same, just a little bit, not much. I don't need much on the blue. Probably, I don't think I'll do any gouache up here or in the sky. Doesn't need it. I don't think in the foreground. That might be all I'm going to do. Oh, I see a little piece right here. Let's a little bit on this urn here. And even at this point, before I've here we go, de-gouachified. That could only be a Daily Art Adventure term right there. Before I've de-gouachified my gouache, even the way it is right now, I don't think my client, very few people would object to the feeling. They wouldn't. Most people would not turn up their nose and say, "Ew, he used gouache on a watercolor." You understand? All my friends who are purists, indeed, have every right to turn up their nose because I'm cheating like crazy. But then again, I'm producing a decent work of art and getting paid for it. So anything that sounds like an apology is not. Oh my goodness. All right, should I quit there? I think I should. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Oh, there's some good chats going on here. Let me see what you guys are saying before I go pick up my iPad. Are you still there? Whoops, I think I dropped my phone and I turned you off. Just a second. That's funny. All right. We're back. There we go. All right, Michael, you're using gouache. How about that? How about that? That's great. So here, you guys can read your own chats right while I read them to you. Exactly, Uncle 60. Gouache. What a terrible name. I didn't buy gouache for many years as a young person because I didn't know how to pronounce it. Whoops. Are we doing good? Do we have sound going on? I think we do. Sorry. I don't know if you guys are still listening or not, but Uncle 60 says, I think Leonardo da Vinci stepped on a tube of paint and the noise went gouache. That's good. Yes, any pen would work. No, no, a big pen would not work. It has to be watercolor. Exactly. My coat straightens you out. It has to be watercolor. And Barbara agrees with me. Get tired of all the crazy bad art. Oh my. Gouache-ness paintings. Good. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Glad you're not upset at them. All right, this has been fun. I will probably do some painting on my own for a while and bring you in. If I start doing anything exciting, I'll do another broadcast, okay? But I'm happy to say that I'm quite happy with the painting at this point. I hope my client is.